Campers, tell me your scariest and craziest personal camping experience. Story 1. I was camping in Northeast Ohio by myself. I was on third and final night there, woke up to take a leak, walked about 10 feet from my hammock and noticed a headlamp about 80,100 feet from me. I watched it for about 10 minutes. I watched him stand up, sit down. I got my boots on and grabbed my hatchet and started to walk to the right of my campsite. I was going to find out what he was up to. I got about 50 yards from my site and started walking towards him when I noticed another headlamp, about 40 feet from me and walking around. I hit the ground and threw some leaves on me. He walked about 10 feet from where I was laying. Then he stopped, lit a cigarette and finished his beer. He threw his can on the ground. After he got far enough that he couldn't hear me, I got up and started walking towards the first guy. I got close enough to him that I can hear his phone receiving messages. I moved up closer to him quietly to where I can see his face lit up from his cell phone. That's when he stood up and started walking towards my hammock. I laid back on the ground for a minute and made my way towards my site. I stopped when I started hearing my tarp that I had above my hammock being trashed. Then I can see flashlights and then my big flashlight turn on and off. I heard my mess kit being thrown and them talking about how he was just here. I continued to lay on the ground and watched my flashlight walk away until it was a small dim light. When the sun came up and I returned, my whole site was destroyed. My hammock and tarp was shredded by what looked like a machete. My mess kit was stomped on. They took my backpack, rain gear, and flashlight. I went to the spot where I seen the first guy and found chew pouches, 8 empty beer can and an empty lighter. I walked to where I had seen the other guy and found an empty bag of powder which turned up to be meth, a mess of cigarette butts and a pile of poop with no toilet paper to be found. Story 2. This past weekend me and my partner decided to go to our usual camping spot. It's very low-key, never usually anyone up this mountain besides 1 or 2 people at a time, and even at that time they're miles away from your campground. Just like every year we brought my parents' little elderly dog. We set up camp, ate some food and drank some beer around the campsite. When we arrived prior to this we scoped out the area to see how busy it was. There was absolutely nobody in sight, the entire mountain campgrounds were entirely empty. We're used to have one hunter or fisher in the area at least. We've never not seen at least one person the entire trip. So we sat around the fire, completely relaxed with my little dog nearby. When we decide to get into bed, my usually very complacent placid pup refuses to settle inside the tent. It's pretty hot this time of year, so we had the tent unzipped with just the mesh covering the opening to let some breeze in. But my pup was looking through the mesh and sniffing, zoning in on something entirely. We decide to get up and check out the camp for whatever he's looking at. We don't see anything, so we decide to sit by the fire to fire us out when my sleepy pup unsettles suddenly with his hackles straight up on end, growling a deep growl into one direction of the woods. We decided to grab the hunting knife and axe and listen. He's snarling and barking vigorously, which took us by surprise because he's been completely comfortable every other year. After a few hours of him acting on high alert, we decide to flip the truck lights on to illuminate our camp as we're surrounded by darkness. We were listening intently, trying to figure out what he's seeing or hearing. After a few minutes he lays down and alarms us again a few minutes later, startling us to the point we make a run for the truck by how aggressively my dog is warning something. We wait, hearts pounding inside the truck, trying to see what's out there. After 30 minutes we assume whatever it is has passed on. After we reposition ourselves in front of the fire again, my dog's hackles are up and we hear the loudest tree branch snap a mere 10 feet away from us in the pitch-black wilderness. Again we hop in the truck with the dog and decide we better leave. As earlier that night we were hearing wolves hunting for a few hours and their howls echoing through the woods. Our main concern was it being a cougar, as they're commonly seen in this area and there had been a lot of attacks on unsuspecting victims. Our main thought was something was stalking us for a long time before moving on. We told my partner's parents that we decided it's better to be safe than sorry, and we were mocked extensively, but we were armed with very minimal weapons. Not anything that would handle a mountain lion or a pack of wolves. We were called chicken shits the entire weekend and mocked over it. I also felt protective over my dog as he's very small. Story 3. My fiancé and I were on a camping trip last summer in Arkansas, casually grilling some dinner when we heard someone loudly yelling for help. I ran a few campsites over to find a clearly drunk man standing in a pool his own blood. Apparently he had dropped his knife and nicked an artery in his ankle, which was spurting blood like a fountain. My fiancé was not far behind me and helped get it wrapped up and elevated while I ran back for my phone to call for an ambulance, only to find out I had no cell service. I knew there was a hospital roughly 20 miles away, so I made a judgment call and loaded the man up into his truck and took off. Now is a good time to mention that blood makes me super squeamish, and I think pure adrenaline is the only thing that kept me from passing out at the wheel. I made it to the hospital in 12 minutes just as he started slurring his speech and hinting at losing consciousness. I still remember the pool of blood spilling out of the door off the floor mat as they took him inside. My fiancé picked me up from the hospital and we headed back. We ended up having to watch his dog and tried our best to have a normal evening. The man showed back up around 10:30 p.m. with 18 stitches. The doctor had told him if we hadn't been there or we had waited for an ambulance he would have bled out and died. Horrifying situation, but we saved a man's life. Story 4. I was on the Appalachian Trail in 2015 hiking, and one night a couple put the boots to me trying to steal my pack, but I zip-tied it to a tree that made them more mad. I got a good beating which ended my hike, but I stabbed one of them in the thigh and one in the top of the foot. I don't usually go off trail, but I did that night and hid out till morning and came across someone with a sat phone and got picked up. The couple got picked up at the local hospital with a lot of other people's gear in their car. Story 5. My dad and I found a dead camper in Yellowstone when I was 5 or 6. We were walking throwing stones into the lake. It was like every feel-good vacation movie you've ever seen. Then we saw this guy slumped against a tree. At first we didn't think much of it, but it was getting cold and dark, and my dad didn't want the guy to fall asleep and wake up unable to find his way back to camp. So my dad and I started walking towards him, but the closer we got the worse it smelt. Not like rotting flesh but like crap, literally like crap. My dad told me to stay back and he walked over to the guy and asked him if he was okay. No response. He asked again. No response. My dad then tapped the guy's shoulder and the body made a sort of crunching noise as it fell slightly to the side. When this happened, the guy's hat fell off. Because of the way the guy had been slanted, it was like all the blood had gone out of half the guy's face and pooled in the other side. One eye was completely red, possibly from a burst blood vessel. My dad rushed over to me and took me back to the camp ranger's fort place. He had me stay with some nice lady, whom I remember looked distinctly like Big Bird, while he led another ranger and a paramedic who was on site to the body. It wasn't a horrifying, "Oh my god I got attacked by a bear" type scenario, but it was pretty scary being in a pretty secluded area far away from home and finding a dead body. Story 6. I worked at a camp in North Georgia and we took kids on the Appalachian Trail around the city of Dahlonega, right where it starts pretty much. This also happens to be the same place that the Army Rangers trained. One nice nights, we just cowboy camped on a tarp because it was cooler and easier than setting up an A-frame. One morning about 15 years back, a college girl counselor woke up with a knife stuck in the ground next to her face. Attached was a note that said, "We could have killed you last night. XOXO the Army Rangers." Story 7. I once camped during 4th of July. Family, we were spending the time with made oysters. My buddy ate quite a few of them. The tent had a doggy door. Later that evening, my buddy shoved his head out the doggy door and started giggling. T-3 for detonation. That tent was horrific. My eyes burned, the tears came, and the nose succumbed to the bowels of hell. I was half trying not to laugh at how bad the foul stench was and gasping for any clean air possible. By the time I got the tent open, there were a number of flatulence expended by that demon. I believe I was close to finding evidence of God by succumbing to that tent. I believe I threw away the tent before the next use. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more crazy stories.